To the Arlington County Board's public hearing on the fiscal year 2022-2024 CIP. We have Board Member Karen Tonis, Vice Chair Crystal, Board Member Christian Dorsey, myself, Matt DeFranti, Chair. We have Ms. Garvey, I believe, is going to join us remotely, as will others. And we have both virtual participation as well as those of you here in person. Thanks so much to both groups for being here. We resumed in-person meetings June 12th. All board members and senior staff here on the dais have been vaccinated. The public is welcome to join us in person as well. We do ask that you wear a mask only if you cannot maintain a 6-foot distance from others while in the boardroom and are not vaccinated. And the same is true for other areas of the Government Center building. We continue to offer a virtual participation option through Microsoft Teams. Tonight, we will only hear public testimony on the proposed fiscal year 2022-24 capital improvement plan. We have a brief presentation from the manager before then. For context, the board will act on the CIP at the July board meeting, either on the 17th of July or the recessed meeting on July 20th. Before we hear from public speakers, we will receive a brief presentation from County Manager Mark Schwartz and staff. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This evening, Richard Stevenson is going to walk through a 9-slide presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Yes, just a brief overview of the areas that we will hear about from the public tonight on the 3-year CIP that the manager proposed back in May. So on the first slide, as you can see, you can see the various areas that this 3-year capital plan funds, ranging from transportation and roads to parks and recreation, to technology, to community conservation, stormwater, and utilities. And as we've been talking about over the last several weeks, this is a constrained CIP that bridges us to the 10-year CIP that we will propose next year once there's some clear economic, we enter into some clearer economic times. On the next slide, this highlights some of the guiding principles that we used in developing the CIP for this year. As I mentioned, the constrained approach that we had, we were trying to limit the impact on debt service to the general fund, which impacted the amount of bonds that we're proposing be issued for this 3-year CIP. We were prioritizing projects that address the failing and end-of-life infrastructure, projects that we need to propose for the legal and regulatory obligations, specifically Metro, restarting a number of investments identified as part of various planning processes, neighborhood conservation in Crystal City being 2 examples, and a number of technology and facility investments as we enter this post-pandemic workplace environment. The next slide outlines how we pay for the CIP, and as you can see here, this 3-year CIP totals about $1.25 billion, and the funding comes from a wide array of sources. They range from general obligation bonds and cash to various state and federal funding. It is important to note that as the CIP and its funding, there are a number of restricted revenue sources. So for example, commercial and industrial tax is legally dedicated to transportation, and then we have revenues coming from our stormwater tax, which are restricted for stormwater investments. The next slide outlines the proposed 2021 bond referenda, which totals about $62.5 million. This will be for the voters in November. And while it's typical to have, it isn't typical to have an off-year referenda, the request is largely intended to cover the next year or 2 of mandatory funding needs for Metro, paving, and some other critical preventive maintenance projects. On the next slide, this summarizes the CIP by program area. And again, that second line, transportation, is the largest area in the CIP, followed by water and sewer infrastructure. And then finally, we have just a slide that outlines some of the feedback we've received. We weren't able to collect before the manager proposed a CIP feedback in person. We did use an online survey tool, and you can see where the interests in the community lie before we proposed the budget. And since the manager proposed, we've had a number of commission meetings, we've had a variety of work sessions, and here tonight we'll hear from the public additional comments that they have on the proposal by the manager. So with that, I will, oh, no, one more slide, sorry. Again, just this sort of highlights the timeline that we've been working through from the proposed CIP in the middle of May. The public hearing is tonight. In the next week or two, we'll have a work session with the board for final markup and adopting then mid-July. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. It's good to see you and Ms. Meredith here in person, and thank you for giving this that context. For some in the audience, this is familiar, but for those who this is new, that CIP context I hope is helpful. Thanks very much. A few announcements before we call our first speaker. The clerk, Ms. Jacobs, will begin to call speakers two at a time, beginning with pre-registered 2-minute speakers, followed by the pre-registered 3-minute speakers. We will then hear from anyone who has registered after the start of the meeting in the same order. If you are joining us remotely via Microsoft Teams, please keep your microphones muted and your cameras off until you are called to speak. If you are calling in by phone, please press *6 to unmute. If you are using a computer browser or app, click the microphone button on the toolbar. In-person speakers, please be ready. We don't have too many, but please be ready to approach the podium when your name is called. There are buttons right down here on the right side of the podium to adjust the height. Please speak directly into the microphone, and you may remove your mask at the podium. Listen for the tone, whether here in person or virtual, to indicate when your time has elapsed. Those of you who wish to submit written statements or documents may do so by bringing them up to our clerk or by email to countyboard@arlingtonva.us. With that, we are eager to hear from our public. Madam Clerk, would you please call the first two speakers?
Our first speaker is Steve Young, followed by Jillian Burgess.
Mr. Young, are you there?
I'm here. I hope you can hear me.
We can. Go ahead.
Are you? Okay, excellent. Good evening. I'm here representing the Friends of Gulf Branch Nature Center. The events of 2020 resulted in an enormous increase in use of our parks. Many Arlingtonians and neighbors, restricted by the pandemic, discovered our parks for the first time. They came and they are still coming. Our natural resources have provided tremendous solace and relief, but they are under stress. The Arlington County Civic Federation identified a significant disconnect between Arlington's needs and aspirations for nature and the historical and currently planned levels of investment in our natural resources. The two nature centers have severe limitations, and they have received almost no support in CIPs from FY2013 onward. We ask that at least $1.5 million be allocated in this CIP to support both nature centers. And we recommend that the county start planning for a new Long Branch facility as part of the redevelopment of county-owned property on Carlin Springs Road. The current center should be enhanced with a state-of-the-art nature center embedded in a multi-purpose, environmentally focused facility that could also address energy, climate, biophilic design, gardening and landscaping, and sustainability education and demonstrations. The new center also would meet ADA requirements and allow for improved access through all modes of transportation. At Gulf Branch, we urge a long-delayed upgrade of its Native American room to teach the documented heritage of Native Americans in Arlington. Finally, this and future CIPs must allocate meaningful funding for parkland acquisition consistent with the PSMP vision. A reasonable parkland acquisition target would be at least $5 million per year, and the planned land acquisitions for stormwater overland relief must be coordinated with DPR and park planning processes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Next speaker,
Our next speaker is Jillian Burgess, followed by Jane Green.
Ms. Burgess.
Thank you very much. My name is Jillian Burgess, and I'm very excited to be back here. And as we come back,
There we go.
there's no way.
Go ahead.
It's very important that
Chair DeFerranti, I'm on Teams, it's Aleister, and I can't hear anything.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. You may have to mute and then listen via another device until it's your turn to speak. Give us just a couple of minutes. The clerk will work with you, and we currently have Ms. Burgess speaking, so if you can hold on, and Ms. Burgess, go ahead.
making it safer and easier to walk and bike to our school buildings. But why safe routes to schools? That encourages sustainable transportation throughout the county. Our school buildings are scattered throughout Arlington County and cover the entire county. Schools are also public facilities. They not only serve the students and staff that go there every school day, they provide space for sports teams, for tournaments, for theater protections and arts exhibitions. They provide green space and playgrounds for our neighborhoods and even voting locations. Everyone in Arlington needs to get to a school building at some point. SESMO's plan includes 4 items for this CIP. Two are funds, pots of money, that would support the excellent collaboration that's already going on between APS and Arlington County. This collaboration is a model that effectively and efficiently uses Arlington's resources to serve both the school system and the county at the same time. One fund would allow tactical projects like the excellent projects we saw on Lorcom Lane and Carlin Springs Road during the pandemic to go forward. Another would provide capital funding to make projects like that more permanent. The other 2 projects are specific, providing protected bike lanes on George Mason to connect Wakefield High School and Claremont Immersion to the WNOD Trail, and a new trail on the west side of Carlin Springs to connect Kenmore Middle School and Carlin Springs Elementary to the WNOD Trail, opening up a really big plot of public land that we could use more efficiently in the transportation or better. So thank you very much for your time and your service, and I support SESMO's plan.
Thank you, Ms. Burgess.
Our next speaker is Jane Green, followed by Chris Fornash.
Ms. Green.
Hi, thank you. I'm very pleased to be able to speak to the CIP, which is about investing in Arlington, and I'm also invested in Arlington. I continue to live here despite the pandemic because I value a walkable, bikeable, and transit-rich environment. I moved to this neighborhood specifically just a month ago so that I can walk my son over there to kindergarten and then hop on the metro or hop on my bike to get to work in DC. I want to be able to bike safely to the Central Library and to the grocery store. Arlington's commitment to sustainability and smart growth must include commitments to sustainable mobility in the CIP. Relying only on opportunistic projects and site plans is not enough. We need to put our money where our values are. So today, as part of the Sustainable Mobility Plan, I want to talk about 2 specific elements of the bike network that can help fill in gaps and make biking safer and more enjoyable. The first is a protected bike lane along Highland Street to help allow people to go a north-south route through the Clarendon neighborhood. Right now, there's biking facilities along Clarendon and Wilson, but there's very difficult to go north-south. Adding some protected bike lanes along Highland will really help create this corridor. The second is extending the 2-way protected bike lane along Fairfax Drive to Clarendon Circle. There is just a short section of existing 2-way protected bike lane that connects the Custis and Bluemont trails to the Glebe Road along the north side of Fairfax Drive. It would be really great if we can extend this all the way to Clarendon Circle and would provide a low-stress east-west bike spine that connects trails all the way through the Roslyn-Ballston corridor. So I'm looking forward to learning this new neighborhood and biking more, and I'm already seeing many places where we could expand protected bike lanes so that not only myself, but my son can bike in this neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green.
Our next speaker is Chris Fornash, followed by Julie Rosenberg.
Mr. Fornash. Are you there virtually, Mr. Fornash?
You need to unmute.
We'll try and come back. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Julie Rosenberg.
Hi, I'm here virtually. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead, Ms. Rosenberg.
Okay, great. Thank you for having me. So I wanted to share, when I look at the CIP and I think about the 30-plus year career I had in government running programs and setting policies, I can relate to how it reflects how I went about setting priorities. I prioritized being pragmatic and pacing investments to get projects done and points on the board. But with a changing climate, everything is different. And it means being pragmatic now is to make investments that reflect the absolute urgency, huge urgency to decarbonize our local government and across our economy. Before I retired from the U.S. EPA, I led a group that helped local and state governments, including Arlington, with climate and energy policies. We worked with local governments to help them analyze their greenhouse gas reduction opportunities, set goals, implement programs and policies, measure progress, and do all this while engaging their communities with people like me now. I'm now a customer of the program I ran, which is wonderful. Shortly before I retired from EPA, I participated in a comprehensive assessment of how the U.S. can decarbonize by mid-century. And among the key outtakes that I think are relevant to the Arlington CIP are that the grid is rapidly transitioning away from fossil generation, that technologies are evolving to capture the benefits of the cleaner generation, that we need to quickly invest in infrastructure to deploy electrification, and there will be costs, but there are also costs to inaction. So if you look around, if you look at the EPA Climate Change Indicators report, you will see there are impacts now, and they're particularly hurting people who are vulnerable. If you suffered from pollen, ragweed season is getting longer and more intense. I had a brutal spring, and I had the means to get help and turn on my AC and get a filter, and not everybody has that. So I want to ask you now to tap efficient and cleaner energy and disinvest now in GHG emitting fossil.
Thank
My
you, Ms.
time up?
Rosenberg. Yes, it is. Thank
Okay.
you, Ms. Rosenberg. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our
Next
next
speaker?
speaker is Tom O'Reilly, followed
Miss-
by Darren Buck.
Good evening. Good
Mr.
evening.
O'Reilly.
Good evening. I'm here as the convener of the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions Arlington Hub. FACTS works to unite people of faith to develop local solutions to the climate crisis. First of all, I'd like to thank the board, the staff, and the residents of Arlington for the great steps we've taken over the past few years. The green buildings plans, the community energy plan, and then the charge to the county manager to pursue a whole of government approach to climate action. That being said, the proposed CIP is a fine document from where we were 10 or even 5 years ago. A capital plan such as this proposes projects that will last by definition 5 to 10 years out. This plan proposes much of the same works as in the past. More sidewalks, building renovations, transit works, but says really nothing about the climate impacts of those projects or the fact that we will be living them for the next couple of decades. So, which is the time frame when we really need to pay attention to climate action if we're going to meet our self-proclaimed goals. We cannot rely on old technology and practices to create the world we need to survive. The plan does give a nod to solar-ready roofs, LED conversions, and maybe 13 EV charging stations, which is great. I've got an EV. I like that. I charge at home. I got solar power on my roof. I drive with the sunshine. So, every time in this plan, every line in this plan should be reviewed for climate impact, and specific steps to mitigate that impact should be included in the document. We can take steps towards those goals by doing things like requiring carbon capture concrete in our county projects, installing charging infrastructure at the current ART bus maintenance facility, and then acquiring public electric buses to use those, and specifying electric heat pumps in all buildings, new buildings. We have the opportunity to set an example in how we do public works in the future. We should take that opportunity. We not only should, but we must. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly.
Our next speaker is Darren Buck, followed by Collier Cook.
Mr. Buck, are you there?
Hi there. My name is Darren Buck. I'm speaking on my own behalf and not the Transportation Commission or my employer. I wanted to speak about the SUSMO, the Sustainable Mobility for Arlington draft CIP recommendations. They're a sensible package of plans that help advance sustainable transportation. Having seen British Columbia hit 118 degrees Fahrenheit yesterday, climate change, I will align myself with everyone else who has highlighted it as a necessary priority in this plan. But EV chargers and PV panels are great, but the transportation sector remains our largest emitter and the largest unknown in our community energy plan. The biggest progress and energy in our 2-year-old bike element of the Master Transportation Plan has come, frankly, because the board has endorsed community demands for building better on-street bicycle facilities through development. The Crystal City Bike Plan, currently underway, is a great example of how the board has stepped in and encouraged progress on that bike element, but we still see a lack of tangible progress on moving forward and tracking and making sure that bike element implementation is a core part of county operations. 2 doable, high-impact, low trade-off projects described in the SUSMO plan are Fairfax Drive and Highland Street approaching Clarendon Circle, which were described ably by Ms. Green before me. A fund to add bicycle elements via change orders would allow us to add bike facilities to other projects where perhaps no one envisioned a protected bike lane before, with the big stormwater program on tap. I expect there's going to be plenty of unforeseen opportunities to incorporate low-stress bike facilities together with stormwater infrastructure. If we're never going to do a rigorous job of planning and tracking implementation of the bike element, I hope we can at least make ourselves ready to nimbly react to those sorts of opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Collier Cook, followed by Aleister Watson.
Mr. Cook.
Good evening, County Board members. I'm Collier Cook with Sustainable Mobility for Arlington County. We have put forth 5 overall priorities for this CIP, and that I'd like to summarize for you now. We first must fully fund Vision Zero. As someone who was a victim of a couple of crashes while on a bike last year, I have to consider myself lucky. I was able to walk away from both those crashes with a broken arm being my worst injury, but other victims have not been so lucky. So if we do not improve street safety, then people will simply not walk, bike, or go on transit. That's why we need a dedicated Vision Zero capital fund to timely implement the highest priority safety projects with permanent solutions. This would be in addition to funds for quick build safety interventions. Second, we must speed up our transit. I am encouraged by your discussion last week regarding onboard bus improvements, but we also need to study if we could implement dedicated bus HOV lanes on Columbia Pike. Our third priority, a safe route to school that Jillian Burgess just discussed in depth moments ago. Fourth, we need to build out our bike network for all ages and abilities, as Darren just reviewed. Our fifth priority is to expand and connect the trail network. Arlingtonians really love our trails, and they've been requesting even more. So let's expand the trail network by filling in the missing gaps and also study locations where grade separated crossings may be appropriate. And finally, I'd like to note that if staff can't fully move on these 5 priorities right now, we request they spend the next year preparing to move on them for our 10-year CIP coming up next year. Thank you for your attention and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Next is Aleister Watson, followed by Kathy Reeder.
Mr. Watson, are you there?
Yes, hello. before I begin, I just wanted to say to Jillian, who I consider a friend of mine, if she's still there, that I did not intend to interrupt her, but I just couldn't hear her or the county board members. So that was the reason for my interruption. But now I can hear everything. So whatever the clerk or the staff did worked. So thank you.
Sure.
All right. So I am here on behalf of the Schools Committee for Livability 22202. I was born and raised in Arlington, and I'm a graduate of the public school system. I attended Claremont, Gunston, and Wakefield, and I consider it, like any other graduate, to be an extremely formative time. One lasting memory was the fact that every class was the record holder for the largest in the history, and that kept going. So I just wanted to reiterate a letter that we sent to the county board expressing our concern about school capacity, especially in the 22202 neighborhood. There is no elementary, middle, or high school that is in the Crystal City or Aurora Highlands area, even though that's the epicenter for the Amazon's HQ2. And I definitely believe that we need to plan ahead and continue to think forward about school capacity in the CIP. And I see I have 15 seconds left, and I just wanted to wish everyone well. Katie, Crystal, I know you had a trip to North Carolina. I hope that was good. Christian, I hope the piano playing's going well. Matt, I like your Facebook posts, and I hope everything's going well. Libby, I hope everything is well. Talkus, I hope you had a good time with family. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson, for the comments and the good wishes. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Kathy Reeder, followed by Malika Scriven.
Ms. Reeder.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Reeder, and I live in the Glen Carlin neighborhood. I am speaking tonight as an individual in support of increased CIP funding for the Neighborhood Conservation Program. I'm an Arlington resident who is fortunate enough to have a funded neighborhood conservation street improvement project getting underway this summer on my street. The project will install curb, gutter, and sidewalk along 2 blocks of 4th Street South and resurface an aging roadway. The project includes stormwater drainage and infrastructure improvements, preservation of trees, planting of additional street trees. It will add greatly to the safety and livability of this section of our historic neighborhood. There are no bells or whistles in this project. It provides basic functionality while meeting important infrastructure and regulatory requirements. As the block rep for this project, I've worked closely with my neighbors and with the county's NC staff through the design and review stages of the process. I've seen firsthand the benefits of the NC program's engagement process in arriving at a 90% approval of the project by homeowners. I can't speak highly enough of the professionalism and integrity of Tim McIntosh and the NC staff. I now have a much better understanding of the complexity and cost of a project that may appear simple on the surface. While very appreciative of the NC funding for 4th Street, I know there are other needs in our neighborhood that will require future NC funding. And we are one neighborhood out of over 60 in Arlington. $2 million per fiscal year is not nearly sufficient to address the ongoing needs for the improvements required across the county. I urge you to support, as quickly as fiscally possible, a substantial increase in the annual CIP funding for the NC program. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reeder. Appreciate your comments. Madam Clerk, before we go to the next speaker, I did want to let everyone listening at home and those in the room know that Ms. Garvey is also listening via phone. So she is here hearing your comments and listening to your comments. She's having a little difficulty with the Teams for the virtual, but she is here fully listening to your comments. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Malika Scriven, followed by Dexter Clifton.
Ms. Scriven.
Good evening, Chair. Hi there. Good evening, Chair and members of the County Board. I'm Malika Scriven, Vice President of Planning and Development at the National Landing Business Improvement District. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Capital Improvement Plan. On behalf of National Landing BID, I'd like to first acknowledge the great work of our county staff and elected officials in navigating this truly challenging year. Secondly, I'd like to also acknowledge that while the CIP only covers a 3-year horizon, we know it has taken a tremendous amount of effort to get a plan that is both fiscally responsible and responsive to the needs of our community, and we thank you for that. The CIP outlines critical investments for National Landing that will set us on a trajectory to becoming the most connected urban downtown in the county. Projects such as CC to DCA, Intermodal Connector, the new Crystal City East Metro Station, the VRE Station expansion, and a range of complete street projects that will deliver next-generation mobility and further support key investments in transit and Vision Zero throughout our downtown. The BID looks forward to participating in the upcoming planning effort that recognizes the potential for a green ribbon concept to further unify our district. We applaud this investment. We also point to important county investments that we hope will quickly follow new development at Center Park, Metro Market Square, and the 15th Street to deliver the open space commitments anticipated through the development approval process. The BID welcomes the arrival of a new county library, which will serve as an important community gathering space in the area that lacks such facilities. We also see an opportunity more strategically utilize tax increment financing to deliver many of the above noted investments. In closing, we encourage the county board to approve this 3-year CIP and continue the commitment to transform and unify Crystal City, Pentagon City, and Potomac Yard communities that comprise National Landing. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Scriven. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Dexter Clifton, followed by Ellie Walsh.
Mr. Clifton, are you there? Mr. Clifton? Okay, we'll go on to the next speaker, and then we can check back at the end to see if he's there.
Okay, Ellie Walsh.
Ms. Walsh?
Hi, my name is Ellie. I'm here to tell you why Arlington Boathouse is important. I graduated from Washington Liberty High School in 2020. I was a member of the rowing team for 5 years, a captain of the team my senior year, and I just finished my first year as a rower at the University of Notre Dame. Rowing at WNL gave me a sense of leadership, a work ethic, best friends with my teammates, and it gave me the opportunity to row and study at Notre Dame. During my time at WNL, there was added stress when the boat club we ran out of threatened to stop our contract, meaning there would be no place to store our boats and ultimately no season. There was also a time when Arlington was going to cut funding for all schools' crew teams. Each rower at WNL has to raise around $1,000 and pay $2,000. And while there are scholarships available for students, this is a huge barrier that stops people from rowing. An Arlington Boathouse would give more students the same opportunity that I had by reducing the cost of the sport and increasing time efficiency by eliminating daily travel to DC. The WNL crew team was initially started to make a privileged sport, once reserved for private schools, more diverse for students in public schools. An Arlington Boathouse would continue that mission by opening the sport to more students and giving them the same opportunities that the sport gave me. Right now at WNL and Wakefield, crew is a no-cut sport. This allows people like me with no experience at all to learn and grow into hardworking and successful athletes. WNL, Yorktown, and Wakefield are all at different boathouse locations but face the same predicament, limited rack space for boats. This threatens the no-cut aspect of all teams. The Arlington Boathouse will help fix that problem and allow all students to enjoy the sport. In addition, the boathouse would give Arlington River access, which would allow for other recreational and educational activities. For these reasons, I ask you to keep your commitment to the Arlington Boathouse project and include $800,000 for planning and design in the capital improvements budget for fiscal years 22 and 24. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Walsh.
Our next speaker is Mary Glass, followed by David Smith.
Yes, do you have my slide?
I do. You can start, Ms. Glass.
There you go, Ms. Glass. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to comment on the CIP, and I'm going to use Parks and Recreation as an example. I have 3 major areas of concern. First, the unmet recreational and open space requests that have already been made from the public. Second, the equity in services provided. And finally, the climate change responsiveness. Next slide, please. In 2016, the county funded a survey that looked for what improvements that the citizens wanted in county parks. More than 50% of the people said their first choice was open space for passive facilities and maintaining and preserving existing trees and natural resources. Next slide. In the same survey, trying to find out the priorities for actually spending money, it turned out that the same things were important: hiking trails, natural areas, paved multi-use trails. The formal tennis courts and things like that were not a priority. Next slide, please. So the proposed CIP, as it now stands, raises some very serious concerns about allocation. $12.2 million over 3 years for maintenance capital, including a tennis complex, $9.8 for master planning and items like a boathouse, which only had one person requested in the survey, trail modernization, which is largely paving and bridges, $7.4 million, synthetic turf for $5.3 million, but nothing for acquisition of land. The question is which citizens and communities are really being served with these investments? Next slide, please. What changes are required? First, we need to respond to the independent survey, which is backed by civic groups and environmental experts. Second, we need to invest in purchasing parkland and aggressively planting and maintaining our public trees. Third, eliminate superfluous investment, including the boathouse and extended planning exercises, such as $400,000 for the forestry plan. And finally, we need to respond proactively to the drastic changes that are coming to our social and physical environment.
Thank you, Ms. Klass.
Our next speaker is David Smith, followed by Charles Denny.
Mr. Smith.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is David Smith. I live in Bluemont. I'm here to plea for additional stormwater mitigation funding. I did review the CIP plan, and it's great. It does a lot of great things, but I think it falls short in 3 key areas. The first area is the Ballston Beaver Pond. As you know, it's being funded. There is work being done, or that will be done. But that work is focused on water quality. It's not focused on water retention. With all the storms we've had recently, we really need to take a hard look at water retention. I think some funds should be allocated to relook at that project and perhaps do some further retrofitting, right, before that project gets too far along. It's really important to the people downstream for you all to look at that. The third area is stream bank erosion, in general stream maintenance. I and many of my neighbors live near Lubber Run, and we know that that stream bank is completely undermined. There's a lot of sediment flowing into it, which means a lot of sediment flowing down to the Chesapeake. There are large trees that are being undermined and are going to have to be taken down. It's really a shame. There needs to be funding. And I've seen that in the CIP there was the Resilient Streams Plan that was identified, but it has just a small amount of funding, I think $175K. Some estimates we've seen, that doesn't even come anywhere near to the kind of funding that's needed to repair some of these streams. And I'm sure Lubber Run isn't the only one. The third key area, and this one's very important, but it's harder for people to grasp, and that is that there are probably 100 to 200 homes that are now going to be moved into a 100-year floodplain in 2022. Those folks in those homes are going to have to pay large amounts of insurance for flooding. Their home values may be impacted. They may have to retrofit their homes. Arlington has a role to play there. Arlington development has caused a lot of those water issues. Arlington needs to look at how they can make some of those homeowners right, and they need to look at it quickly because 2022 is going to be here soon. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Our next speaker is Charles Denny, followed by Richard Viola.
Mr. Denny.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight about the 2023 to 2024 CIP, especially to be able to do it in person. That's nice. I don't envy the decisions that you all will have to be making. I want to speak up for the people who aren't here tonight speaking. Essential workers, kids who go to our schools, people who rely on their feet, wheels, or transit to get around. We need to take care of those people and give them real transportation options and safe transportation options. I fully support the proposals put forward by SESMO. I want to emphasize a couple of the things in their plan. One are the 2 funds, the Safe Routes to School Fund and the Vision Zero Fund. When I served as Arlington County Bicycle Pedestrian Program Manager, we had a couple of funds like that, and it allows to quickly respond to some things that come up with the community, to do small projects that have big impact, and to give people who aren't involved in other big projects a voice and a place to have some real improvements. The other is Arlington is a member of the Capitals Trails Coalition. We have a number of trails in the county that are a big part of that 800-mile network. The Arlington Boulevard Trail is the one trail in Arlington that really needs some attention and could really use some help. The Susmo plan calls for a full study of the trail from the county line to Roslyn. There are a couple of projects underway. The Susmo plan also talks about the intersection at Glebe Road. That, if you're out there, and I was just out there last week, that is tough to get to cross either on the north side or the south side. There are some real options that can be done in those locations. Obviously, I work in the bike field, so there are some ways, I think, to make that better, to connect to the new elementary school, to Thomas Jefferson, the community center. Please keep in mind, the people who have kept us going and didn't have the option to stay home this last year and a half. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Denny. Next speaker.
Our next speaker is Richard Viola, followed by Jack Coxella.
Mr. Viola.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Thank you for providing this opportunity to speak. I know it's a real challenge having to deal with the technology and everything, but I appreciate having this chance to speak here. And I'm here not as a former county staff person, but as a Arlington resident, Bluemont resident, and a volunteer with the Capital Trails Coalition, as well as some previous speakers have been. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about 2 years ago, we were here and we adopted the Master Transportation Plan, bicycle element, also the same meeting, the Open Space Master Plan, Public Space Master Plan was adopted. We've since done the Vision Zero. A lot of good planning has been taking place in the county, kind of looking at how we can make it a safer, better place to bike and to walk. This is the first CIP that's come up since those plans were adopted, and it's going to take us to about 5 years out from when those plans were adopted. This is the time to be putting the funds in to make those projects which you identified real. And to actually kind of bring them into the point where we're actually under construction and putting into place. In order to do that, we're going to have to find some money. I appreciate that you have put some projects in, or the staff has identified some projects to go in there. I think those are a great start. I think more needs to be done beyond that, particularly as Mr. Denny spoke to, the Arlington Boulevard Trail, which is one of the oldest trails in the county, and in places is very nice because it's been upgraded by VDOT or by a developer or by neighborhood conservation program, but really the county's transportation department hasn't found the money to do the improvements, and really it's time that we start to look at that a little more. The East End, I believe, is going to get some funds, or at least is proposed to get some funds to the CIP. Really from Glebe Road to the west, the trail is basically a trail in name alone. There's a lot that needs to be done to make that better. A lot of it is just one-way directional service road and sidewalk. It's time for a full-scale study engineering study to kind of look at how that can be done. And hopefully you can find some funds in this CIP to do that. I think it's very important to do so now because we are possibly at the verge of seeing a great amount of federal funds come available through infrastructural funding through the federal government. If we have something in place, if we know what we want, we know what to ask for, and we should be able to get something for it. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Viola.
Our next speaker is Jack Coxella, followed by Audrey Clement.
Mr. Coxella.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can. Good.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the County Board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. My name is Jack Coxella. I have served as past chair and am here today representing officially the Capital Trails Coalition, previously mentioned by Charles and Richard. The CTC is made up of over 70 member organizations, agencies, and businesses across Northern Virginia, District of Columbia, and Maryland. The main goal of the coalition is to create an equitable, connected, and low-stress regional trail network that will transform public life by providing access to open space and reliable transportation for people of all ages and abilities. We are thrilled to see that the proposed FY22 CIP budget allocates funding for new trail connections like the Boundary Channel Drive Interchange Improvement Project and adds funding for maintaining existing trail facilities like the Bluemont Junction Trail safety improvements. I'm here today to express the Coalition's strong support for the funding allocated to trail improvements and new connections across the county, and we urge you to preserve this recommended funding as the CIP is finalized. Arlington County is close to completing its portion of the region-wide 881-mile network identified by the Capital Trails Coalition. But more attention and urgency need to be put on the Arlington Boulevard Trail. Between Glebe Road and the Seven Corners area, the trail is a series of loosely connected service roads, sidewalks, and under-maintained narrow asphalt sections that are not accessible to all users. We specifically would like to see design funding allocated to the Arlington Boulevard Trail for the following: upgrades to the existing trail from Jackson Street to Glebe Road to meet current trail safety standards, a safe and improved trail crossing at Glebe Road, a new section of off-road trail from Glebe Road to North Thomas Street, upgrades to the existing north side sidewalk to trail width from North Thomas Street to George Mason Drive, and upgrades to the existing trail between Road Street Bridge to Fort Myer Drive. In order to take advantage of the expected windfall of new federal funds for active transportation, the county should have projects like Arlington Boulevard Trail that are ready to be funded. We hope you will do so. Thank you for your time this evening and appreciate your service.
Thank you, Mr. Coxella.
Our next speaker is Audrey Clement.
Ms. Clement.
Yes, I'm Audrey Clement, the independent candidate for Arlington County Board. I am both an avid kayaker and a patron of the boathouses on the DC side of the river. Yet I join with opponents of the Upper Roslyn Boathouse project in urging the board to remove funding for it in the CIP on both environmental and procedural grounds. In particular, I want to emphasize the following points. The project would denude the park at 1101 Lee Highway of mature tree canopy. Some argue that it's okay to clear cut a site if doing so will remove invasive trees. This argument is of dubious validity here, since 1101 Lee Highway is located on the fall line of the Piedmont Plateau, where the impacts of runoff-generated erosion are significantly greater than elsewhere in Northern Virginia. While the Public Spaces Master Plan, the PSMP, recommends that the county collaborate with the National Park Service, the NPS, to develop a boathouse for non-motorized boating, the county has never conducted a public process to determine a location for the boathouse or the need for a support facility that would clear-cut a vulnerable natural area at 1101 Lee Highway. Funding the boathouse in the CIP would not only preempt such a process in the future, the lack of public participation in this decision directly contravenes the county's recently adopted resolution to promote equity, diversion, and inclusion in its planning process. The county and the National Park Service never solicited formal recommendations from any of its own commissions when the NPS prepared its environmental assessment for the Arlington County and vicinity boathouse in 2018. Going forward, county commissions will have no opportunity to weigh in on this important project, even though they have the prerogative to do so. There are alternatives to denuding Roslyn of its last wooded public space. Gravelly Point offers an excellent location for an Arlington boathouse. Unlike the Upper Roslyn site, Gravelly Point contains only mowed grass, a few trees, a large parking lot, and a ramp for transporting small boats into the river. From both an environmental and recreational perspective, Gravelly Point is the preferred alternative for a Roslyn boathouse. Finally, there is no funding for new parks in the proposed CIP. Removal of boathouse funding would free up funds for needed parkland acquisition, a key priority of the PSMP. I therefore urge the board to remove the $4.7 million allocation for the Roslyn Boathouse and support facility from the county manager's proposed CIP. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Clement. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Hannah Nagel, followed by Bernard Byrne.
Ms. Nagel.
Good evening, Chair DeFranti and members of the County Board. Thank you for the opportunity to testify tonight. My name is Hannah Nagel, and I'm the Vision Zero Manager with the Washington Area Bicyclists Association, WABA. I am submitting my testimony on behalf of our members in Arlington and across the region. Our mission is to empower people to ride bikes, build connections, and transform places. We envision a just and sustainable transportation system where walking and biking and transit are the best ways to get around. Over the last 4 years, I've worked at WABA. I have responded to our crash reports through our WABA's crash reporting tool on our website. The crash reporting tool was created so that we could support bicyclists after they had been in a crash with the resources and expertise that we may have. Many of these crash reports come to us from Arlington County bicyclists. I've heard about crashes in Arlington due to commercial vehicles parked in the street or in a bike lane, dooring, drivers not slowing down to turn right on red, drivers passing bicyclists too slow or too close. Slow would be great. Too close. Hit and runs, drivers making illegal U-turns, and lastly, youth being struck by drivers of vehicles while riding their bike. Some of the injuries I have heard of from crash victims that they've suffered from include cuts, scrapes, bruises, sprains, broken bones, concussions. Bicyclists have also reported anxiety and post-traumatic stress after being in crashes as well. Sometimes I hear, all too often, and I too have said after being in a crash, I'm lucky, or I wasn't injured that bad. Bicyclists and pedestrians and transit users know too well that they're the vulnerable road users. I'd like to sincerely urge you to fund Vision Zero, protected bike lanes and trails in the FY22 CIP budget, including additional funding for the Arlington Boulevard Trail, a Vision Zero tactical fund, a Vision Zero capital fund to fix priority safety problems on Arlington's high injury network, two-way protected bike lane on Fairfax Drive, protected bike lanes on Highland Street, and to expand the scope of repaving, redevelopment, stormwater projects, and other major construction projects, including the development of quick-build protected bike lane projects, and finally, paint and signage on routes and bike boulevards in the Master Transportation Bike Element Plan. Thank you for your time and for your continued commitment to creating safe streets for vulnerable road users in Arlington County. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Nagel. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Bernard Byrne, followed by Joan McIntyre.
Mr. Byrne.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead, Mr. Byrne.
Yes, I sent you an email message yesterday about this, so please read that message. I asked the board to remove the $4.755 million allocation for the planning and design of the Rosenberg Boathouse and support facility at 1108 Lee Highway from the proposed CIP. The amount of this new funds allocated to this project, it comprises 18%, or 1/6 of all the new funds allocated for all projects and programs. This is a priming other projects such as land acquisition and the opportunity to receive the funding. The boathouse will be used and access will be located on a forested piece of National Parks Service property and Potomac River shoreline north of Roswell Island. The support facility would replace a forested Arlington County parcel with 1101 Lee Highway, east of Lynn Street. The county board, the county governor has never conducted a public process to determine the location for either the boathouse or the support facility. When the board acquired the 1101 Lee Highway in 2014, the board issued a press release, and board members also stated that the property could be used for open space for passive recreation, for realignment of a bike trail, for safety purposes, or for an ancillary boathouse. That process of public process has never occurred. A similar statement was made about this in the public space master plan about the 1101 thing. So the board will have no opportunity to determine the best location for a Arlington boathouse if you place an item in the CIP, because that will end the whole process. So basically, the boathouse could be somewhere else, and so could the support facility. The PSMP recommends, the Public Safety Master Plan recommends that the county would collaborate with NPS to develop a boathouse for non-riding motorized boating. However, the PSMP does not identify a location for the facility. This seems to have come about by a collaboration between county staff and the NPS. NPS obviously wants to use the 1101 Lee Highway site for sports, or doesn't have to use its own area, its own site. The National Park Service was very short thing, only a short time. Gravelly Point is an excellent place. Some boaters say it's unsatisfactory for borrowing. However, nobody's ever shown anything that shows this. It's very similar to where the Alexandria boathouse boaters come in, the D. Campbell Rowing Center in Old Town Alexandria. The water conditions are the same. There's no way of saying this is unsuitable, even very bad. It's just simply that is where it should be at Gravelly Point. But please reject this. Do that comprehensive process as you promised.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Next speaker.
Next speaker is Joan McIntyre, followed by Borda Durdo.
Ms. McIntyre.
Good evening. I'm Joan McIntyre, speaking on behalf of the Climate Change, Energy, and Environment Commission. The climate crisis is intensifying, and bold actions are required to avoid the worst consequences. Half measures will not be sufficient. The long-term nature of the county's capital investments mean that decisions made today will play a key role in determining the success or the failure of the county's energy and other sustainability goals. The draft FY22-24 CIP does not offer much concrete information as to how planned investments will achieve these goals. To what extent will these investments improve energy efficiency, shift away from fossil fuels through electrification of building systems and transportation, reduce flooding risks, and protect natural resources? New construction and retrofitting of county buildings and schools are key opportunities to substantially improve energy efficiency and to shift to all-electric systems as needed. And the FY22-24 CIP includes numerous such projects. However, we have new projects such as the Career Center and the Art Bus facility are being funded, but to the best of our knowledge are not committed to being zero energy or net zero carbon buildings. Numerous projects are included for both schools and county facilities to replace HVAC systems, with no indications that these projects also plan to replace natural gas-based systems with highly energy-efficient electric equivalents. In fact, the courthouse complex renovations and the water pollution control plant's HVAC replacements are slated to continue to rely on natural gas. We also are concerned that the county appears to be moving forward on art bus replacements without having a plan in place to transit to electric or zero emissions vehicles. We urge the county board to defer these purchases until such a plan is in place. Counties should also take advantage of CIP expenditures on parking garages at Ballston, Bluemont, and other sites to install EV charging infrastructure that would support the transition to electric vehicles. Many of the roads, bridge, and stormwater projects will require considerable amounts of cement, a key source of carbon emissions. A commitment to using lower carbon solutions would lower the climate impact of these projects. As the county moves beyond the bridge CIP, the county board should insist on clarification on how and whether proposed investments are advancing the county goals for carbon neutrality, biophilia, zero waste, and other sustainability goals. In addition to building retrofits and bus electrification, more investments are needed to fund improvements to public transportation and multimodal options, and for acquisition of property to expand parks and open spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McIntyre.
Our next speaker is Bora Durdu, followed by Bernadette Maurer.
Dear board members, as members of the Arlington community, my family and I share the board's vision to turn Arlington into a thriving technology hub with a state-of-the-art capital infrastructure in place. But we think this vision will be best implemented through an inclusive process that ensures safety and reflects the concerns of the existing community members. One concern we have is Arlington currently has limited guidelines on the installation of small cell towers or 5G poles. This is paving the way to the installation of these towers in locations that are uncomfortably close to residential units and schools. A case in point is the installation of one of these towers on the corner of 13th Street North and North Jackson Street, right next to our house, with no prior notice. Our research revealed that other local jurisdictions such as Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Fairfax County, and Washington, D.C. all have setback requirements which would have prevented the installation of a 5G pole in such close proximity to a residential house. Let me elaborate more. The 5G pole in question is installed by Verizon, is only 15 feet from our house's wall and less than 8 feet from our property line. The pole is closest to the side of the house where our 7- and 9-year-old daughter's bedrooms are. Even with in-person schooling in the fall, they'll be spending about 15 hours a day within 15 feet of the pole. No individual should have to face such high levels of exposure, let alone children. The health effects of radiation emitted by small cell towers remain highly uncertain. Some evidence suggests negative effects on young children. Even more worrisome is that Verizon informed us that it will use these towers to transmit not only at 5G, but also 4G frequency, which penetrates solid structures and human body more easily than 5G frequency. The pole is only about 60 feet from the Clarendon Child Care Center and directly facing classroom windows, which is also a great concern for the school parents. This pole's location would violate the setback requirements currently in place in the neighboring jurisdictions. Please see my written remarks that I emailed earlier today. Also, as highlighted in the remarks I sent, Arlington is unique among local jurisdictions in that it has no setback safety standards in place. Let me finish with a few concrete suggestions for your consideration. We kindly request that the board introduces a 25 feet to 30 feet setback for existing and future installations of these 5G poles from nearby residential houses. We also kindly request that for all future installations, the county provides advance notice to the nearby unit owners. We hope that the board will respond to our request regarding this particular installation and implement a more inclusive process going forward. The Brownsmouth community supports these recommendations, and we will be soon sending the joint letters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Durdu.
Our next speaker is Bernadette Moorer, followed by Jill Barker.
Ms. Moorer.
Jill Barker.
Ms. Barker.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jill Barker, and I am the board chair of Eco Action Arlington, on whose behalf I address you tonight. Let us acknowledge that we hold this meeting on land formerly occupied by the Nacotchtank Nation. Our letter dated June 23rd contains detailed recommendations for this year's capital improvement plan. In short, we were excited when you committed Arlington to becoming carbon neutral by 2050, and we implore you to back up that promise with tangible steps in the CIP. In particular, we wish to see new buildings transition to zero carbon in this CIP cycle, including the Career Center and the Art Bus Maintenance Facility. Further, any new HVAC system should be transitioned to electricity and away from natural gas. Regarding transportation, any new ART bus purchases should be delayed until plans for an electric bus fleet are finalized, and the goals articulated in the Sustainable Mobility for Arlington campaign, we believe, should be funded. We applaud the CIP's proposed commitment to managing stormwater runoff, but we wish to see more detailed impacts associated with these investments, as well as use of low-carbon construction materials. Zero funding for the open public spaces was a huge disappointment, especially considering that the recent study by the Civic Federation documented that funding OPS would help rectify past racial discrimination in Arlington. Finally, dark sky compliant lighting on playing fields and walkways would reduce damaging light pollution to wildlife and ecosystems. In my April budget testimony to you, I reminded you that you govern a hopeful people. As I said then, one of the greatest risks is hope, because the familiar is so beguiling, even when it is unsustainable. As in April, when you acted on many of our concerns, we turn to you again in hope to renew our request for you to create the position of a county-wide environmental leader to guide us all in coordinating a public-private response to the environmental degradation of Arlington's water, land, and air. Further, in a shift from past capital budget practices, we request that Arlington view its native trees and plants as natural capital and provide as much effort and funding to preserve, protect, and enhance these assets as built capital improvements receive. Our natural landscapes sustain our air, water, and wildlife, prevent erosion, enhance property values, and increase human health. Viewing these resources as natural capital and ensuring their preservation through bond funding is more than justified. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you at our September 18th 4-mile run cleanup. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barker.
Our next speaker is Stephen Frederick, followed by Geraldine Levy.
Mr. Frederick.
Good evening. My name is Steve Frederick. I'm here to ask for you to support the planning and design of the Arlington County Boathouse. I'm a lifelong resident of Arlington County. I went to Oak Ridge, Thomas Jefferson, and Wakefield. I even rode at Wakefield back in 1991 and 1992. But for the last 3 years, I've been president of the Wakefield Crew Booster. We have a great working relationship with W&L and Yorktown's boosters. And between the three programs, we put roughly 200 student athletes competing every week during season. We're a no-cut sport, so if there's a desire to row, we find a place for the athletes. We offer scholarships for any that need funding, and I believe we have one of the most diverse teams. We strive to include and improve our diversity. We have rowers that have gone to UVA, Virginia Tech, Purdue, Harvard, the list goes on, many with scholarships, and many return to help with the program after they've graduated. I've never met Ely Walsh before, but her testimony was very fitting. I've heard it many times before. It's common that the past rowers come back and talk about their experience and how it helped shape them through high school and their educational path. Both my daughters will be going to Virginia Tech. One is a junior in ocean engineering, and one is a freshman in environmental science. The passion for the water and environment was born rowing crew on the Potomac and Anacostia rivers. Currently, all three schools have to travel to DC to row, with Wakefield's travel time 35 minutes to an hour each way. An Arlington Boathouse would reduce costs to the student athletes and the schools, help increase diversity, help Arlington County with transportation costs, provide desperately needed water access in Arlington. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Frederick.
Next speaker is Geraldine Levy, followed by John Bloom.
Ms. Levy.
Good evening. On behalf of the Arlington Boathouse Foundation, I'm speaking in support of the 22-24 CIP funding for an Arlington community boathouse. I've been an Arlington County resident for over 24 years, now living in Roslyn. When my son rowed at W&L, I became a rower and have traveled to Thompson's Boathouse in D.C. several days a week for the past 14 years to row. As others have stated, it would be fantastic to have a community boathouse in Arlington located in Roslyn. CIP funding supports over 30 years of work, the 2019 environmental assessment by the National Park Service, and a programmatic agreement with the Park Service and other governmental parties, including Arlington County. There have been many letters of support from a full cross-section of interests, including the Roslyn Business Improvement District, the Potomac Conservancy, Friends of Georgetown Waterfront Park, the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust, the Potomac Boat Club, and Arlington High School crew organizations, as we heard tonight. Community benefits are many. Funding enables enhanced access to the river and outdoor activities and engagement with the natural world, all of which are key to the vitality and future of Arlington County residents, as well as to our visitors and the business community. The value of the great outdoors has been even more evident during our past year of pandemic living. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the county to access over 700 acres of blue open space on the river and an abundance of healthy outdoor recreation on the Potomac at the nation's capital, stretching from Fletcher's Cove to Memorial Bridge. Environmental benefits. While the area looks green and natural, in reality it's a highly disturbed post-industrial site and landfill. It contains legacy infrastructure, roadway, and other paving covered predominantly by invasive non-native plants. We're currently planning a survey of vegetation in partnership with Arlington's master naturalist. Commitment to high environmental standards would include state-of-the-art design and construction techniques to include stormwater mitigation, restoration, and a significant increase in native plant land cover. Why now? Funding is critical because the National Park Service 2019 environmental assessment is valid for only 10 years. The time is now to move ahead with public and private partnerships to support an Arlington community boathouse. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Levy.
Our final speaker is John Bloom.
Mr. Bloom.
Thanks. Thanks for letting me go last. And good evening.
Do you want to try and lift, on the right side, there should be a button to lift up the podium a little bit if you need to.
Oh, yeah. It's as high as it goes.
Okay, go ahead.
There we go. So good evening, Chair DeFerranti, members of the board and staff. I'm John Bloom. I'm chair of the Sierra Club's Potomac River Group. There are three key challenges to reaching carbon neutral government operations. The first is making the electricity supply renewable. Here, the county seems to be well on its way, although we need solar panels on many more government buildings. I think of the county's renewable energy supply as our superpower. Everything powered by that renewable electricity becomes carbon neutral itself. So that leads us to the second challenge, which is using our renewable electricity to power the county's buildings and make them carbon neutral. Here, the CIP falls short. It seems that every major HVAC replacement project will install brand new frac gas-powered systems instead of heat pumps powered by our renewable electricity. This locks the county into decades of greenhouse gas emissions, even if the new systems are more efficient than the old ones. The third challenge is using renewable electricity to power the county's vehicle fleets. Here, the CIP has little to offer. There is a transportation budget of about $600 million for the next few years, and virtually none of that funding is directed at shifting county fleets and parking infrastructure to electric. Most significantly, the CIP would fund 32 brand new fossil fuel powered buses without, it would fund 32 brand new buses. Arlington stands utterly alone in this area by having a 100% fossil fueled bus fleet without any plan or timeline for electrifying. Our neighboring jurisdictions all have committed to fully electric fleets by 2029, for the DC Circulator, 2035 for Alexandria Dash, and pending a final vote, 2035 for Fairfax County as well. Even the most reluctant bus operator, WMATA, has committed to electrify its entire fleet, though it needs to accelerate its timeline. To address these deficiencies, we have 5 recommendations. First, the 20 buses requested in FY22 should be carefully scrutinized, and as many as possible should be deferred. Second, any decision on the 12 CNG buses requested in FY24 should be deferred until an ART bus electrification plan is approved. Third, staff should be directed to make securing grant funding for electric buses and charging infrastructure a priority. Fourth, the board should direct staff to consider EV charging possibilities in connection with every project involving parking lot construction or renovation. And finally, the board should require a memo documenting the rationale for any purchase of fossil fuel, HVAC, hot water, or cooking equipment in county government buildings. Thanks for the extra few seconds. Good night.
Thank you. I believe we started the clock a little bit early. So is that our final speaker, Madam Clerk?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Certainly, that is our chance to hear from our public. Happy if colleagues have specific thoughts. We will have extended discussions either at our July 17th or July 20th meeting. That will be the opportunity where we will debate, discuss, and work on this in detail. So without objection, I will move to close the public hearing on the proposed fiscal year 2022-2024 capital improvement program and to carry over action on these issues to the July 17th, 2020 county board meeting or the recessed meeting on July 20th, 2020. Do I have a second? Second. The motion has been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Madam Clerk, I think if there's a way that we can, we'll have to see via phone if we can confirm Ms. Garvey's vote, but I think that certainly we have 4-0. We have the motion approved. I don't know if there's a provision for phone motion. Thank you, Mr. Dorsey. The motion carries irrespective. With that, are there any other items? There are no other items to come before the board. So with that, I will close this meeting. Thanks very much to each of you for coming in person. Good night.